there's really need to focus a lot more on diligence in the context of AI to identify what is the data, what is the use case, what are the roles of the parties in terms of controller, processor. Is there a controller to controller relationship here because the vendor is going to use the data for a particular purpose? But I think it's really incumbent on people to put a heavier focus on diligence when AI tools are at issue in a way that I think is over and above what we saw with SaaS, just because there are novel ways in which data is being used. So I think that engagement diligence just is so much more important here in a lot of ways. So identifying the roles of the parties, like which party is a controller, which party is a processor. Is it going to be a data processing agreement or is it going to be a data sharing agreement? Or is the company, for whatever reason, going to use the click-through version of the terms on the AI vendor's website, which then there's no data sharing agreement. You're just out of the privacy policy and the terms of service, you're just agreeing to allow them to use the data for as certain enumerated purposes. But I think identifying what the different use cases are, the roles of the party, and then making sure that you're putting in place the right agreement is the path here. But really, diligence, I couldn't emphasize more.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you were talking about the what the standard terms say. And this was the episode last week. We had Olga Mack who had done some research using some data, term scout data about what's in AI contracts versus the general population of SaaS contracts. And I don't remember the exact number, but it was something like 63% of typical SaaS contracts allow the vendor to use the data beyond providing the services. And this was standard terms in AI contracts. It was more like 93% or something like that. So I think the default seems, at least for now, a lot higher that these vendors are looking for this data to use it beyond to provide the service. And what does that mean for DPAs and how you're thinking about the contracting relationship?
Just a lot more value in the data. So I think thinking about that really carefully. And then I think the other thing that I would add, and then I want to hear from Kate on this one too, is I'm seeing more scrutiny of terms in relation to data anonymization, de-identification, and pseudonymization. And companies are being a little more circumspect in not allowing the AI vendor or AI tool provider to use the data even in de-identified form. Whereas before, I feel like people were a little loosey-goosey about allowing vendors to use data to anonymize or aggregate form. And now people are taking a step back and thinking, this data could be re-identified in the context of a large language model. I don't want to allow the vendor to use this data, be able to potentially repackage and sell it or for any purpose. So I'm seeing more scrutiny on those terms. But Kate, I welcome your experience and thoughts on this as well. It's really a shifting landscape. It's every day. There's something new here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that I think the rest of the world, the corporate world, is catching up to what engineering and security folks have been saying for years, which is that anonymized is not a meaningful term. It's a nice umbrella and it's a lovely ideal. But if we're looking at what we can actually define in a legal document, we're looking at de-identified and aggregated information. And those, again, it's not a black or white distinction. Shannon, you are exactly nailing it. You should be concerned that your data will be re-identified. And as the technology improves, that can happen more and more easily. And so these kind of edge cases where somebody spent hours and hours and hours doing a ton of analysis on all this information, maybe they could figure out who this person was, but who would bother doing that? When it's a computer doing that, a lot of people like that suddenly becomes much easier and much more valuable, and it's no longer an edge case. So I think folks are right to be very thoughtful about this. At the same time, if we don't have information to train on and new data is becoming more and more precious as we run out of kind of some of these like large scale data sources that have driven the AI boom till this point, there's just going to be no development in the field. I think customers need to be thoughtful about protecting their clients and also protecting the value of their company, but also realistic. If you're getting a free or a low cost vendor for a limited use case that isn't dealing with maybe super sensitive data, you're paying in the data that you provide. If it's free, you're the product. The social media advertising maxim brought over to the B2B world. And if you have the negotiating power to restrict data use in those ways, think about deletion requirements and think about real restrictions on purpose. Because if you're used to just leaning on anonymizing, that is no longer as valuable a lever as it used to be. On the other hand, there are other methods that are developing technology-wise that allow safe use of data in new ways. Like I was saying, synthetic data. It can be scary on its own for kind of business purposes, but from a perspective of an alternative to de-identification, creating synthetic data off of an existing data set can be hugely beneficial. Then you don't have to worry about a model accidentally spitting out somebody's PII that it's supposed to be trained on but not reproducing. That's happened. That's would be really bad. Unlikely, but very bad. If you can create the synthetic data, it's not de-identified or aggregated. It would have to be a different definition. And you want to be thoughtful about how you're defining that and how not just the lawyer on your vendor, but the product team can really commit to that. And it requires a much more sophisticated knowledge from both sides of the negotiation.
For sure. Which is probably a good segue to the next question about this, and that's for Kate, is the data subject and this issue of what they can extrapolate from your data, even the anonymized, and how we're thinking about that. Can you speak to that, Kate, in terms of the AI products and the DPAs and what you're seeing? Is anything changing in terms of the data subject rights and access and requirements because it's AI?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes, and we're still finding out how to some degree, unfortunately. So one of the issues here is going to be that there's so much variety in what these products are and what is being done with them. So if you have a narrow use case where you're using AI on a specific instance of a model, or there's all the different technology, but if you hear RAG, it means the data is being fed in, but not used to train and should not be shared or impacting the model. A very different risk scenario than if you are actually training a third-party model. And so if you're training a third-party model, different tech lawyers believe differently. I think there is going to be inherently some risk if there's personal information going in on what that is going to mean for your data subject rights in the future. Because once that's in there and trained, you can pull it out for fine tuning. You can pull it out of the underlying training data, but that information is from there on informing, what answers and what context users across the board are going to be getting from that model. So I guess the answer is to look really thoughtfully at how that data is going to actually impact and be fed into the underlying models versus impacting your own use case. Because if it's your own use case and it's feeding into a model that belongs only to your company, at least, you can control and have more factors in place to reduce the risk of that leading to issues. Versus if that is under the vendor's control, who knows? Who knows what they're going to use that in the future, realistically.
And the other thing I see from the outside is just what is personal data seems to be changing because it's no longer just my name, social security number, address. Now it's a picture of my house. People can figure out where I am, or I'm standing on vacation and they can pinpoint exactly where I'm at that moment. And that's the scary big brother stuff. Like I
Yeah.
like that.
Shannon, you had a really good point on that earlier. If you can, from either side of the relationship, customer, vendor, if you can limit the data from just a technological perspective that you're getting, if you can exclude images, exclude video, exclude certain structured information, do it. It is just from strictly a business perspective, like so wise to do. Don't be lazy. Talk to your product teams. They're able to do more than they want to because they have other priorities. But this is, if you can get them to prioritize this one, so much heartache. But yes, exactly, Laura. It is terrifying because it's not just metadata anymore. We used to be worried about metadata. We stripped the metadata, so it's okay. No, God, there are now models that can pinpoint where a photo was taken in any major city just based on the image itself. And that pace of identification and that pace of being able to derive really meaningful, sensitive information from underlying information is just going to increase over time. And the
Yeah.
more information you have, the more like raw data you have, even if it would seem messy to a person, like user generated content, some like dumb meme somebody put up, over time, that's going to become more and more informative.